You're good.
Okay, so this is our presentation on the 1980 El Asnam earthquake by Zoe, Megan, and Lila.
The type of disaster, an earthquake is a geophysical hazard caused by a sudden slip on a fault, resulting in the ground shaking and radiating seismic energy caused by the slip. On the left is a map of all the tectonic plates in the world, and most but not all earthquakes occur near plate boundaries. El Asnam, which is in Algeria, is in the northern part of Africa, and it's very close to the African plate boundary, which is a reason why there was a lot of seismic activity in this area. For the location, the earthquake took place in El Asnam, Algeria. The town is now named Chelef, and it is the capital of the Chelef province of Algeria in northern Algeria. And as of August 2018, the population was 1.5 million people, and the city is located in a valley surrounded by farmland, making the agriculture industry a prevalent one in this area. On the left is an image of the Mediterranean Sea access El Asnam has, contributing to its tourism industry. So you can imagine the effect of a large natural disaster on a city that relies on tourism and travelers for part of its industry. And on the right is a map of the seismic activity of Algeria. You can see the 1980 El Asnam earthquake here with a Richter scale magnitude of 7.3. And then years earlier, the 1954 with a Richter scale magnitude of 6.7, just miles apart. And then in 2003, there was a 6.8 magnitude in Algiers, which is just a couple miles in Algeria. And for like way more recent seismic activity, there was a 4.7 magnitude earthquake in Magra, Algeria on February 23rd, which was just a few days ago. On October 10th, 1980, the initial earthquake occurred at 1:25 p.m. with a moment magnitude of 7.1. This number differs from the 7.3 on the previous page, as that was from the Richter scale. And now the moment magnitude is considered to be a more accurate measure of an earthquake, especially large earthquakes like this one. The initial earthquake lasted 35 seconds, and 3 hours later, there was a 6.2 moment magnitude aftershock. So a really large earthquake to start out with, and then a still large aftershock too. And altogether, this caused 26 miles of surface rupture, and this length is about equivalent to the distance of a marathon for comparison. And the image on the right is a person standing next to one of the surface ruptures on the ground.
Okay, so for what was the trigger? Since earthquakes are geophysical disasters, when talking about the trigger, we must look at the tectonic setting and the type of disaster that occurred. For this specific earthquake, no foreshocks were recorded. There's a lot of uncertainty and controversy regarding the exact configuration and character of the complex plate boundary where the El Asnam earthquake occurred, but it is believed that the boundary begins as a transform fault at the Mid-Atlantic Ridge and moves eastward as a subduction zone through the Mediterranean Sea, and there connecting to the Arabian plate boundary. There, sudden movements occurred along a rough planar zone of weakness or a fault passing through the rock masses. This initiation of movement released a shock wave that traveled along the fault plane, triggering the movement along the whole length of the fault until some resistance to the movement was encountered. This resistance produced a strong echo of the original shock wave that travels back down the fault plane, resealing the fault plane. Because one side of the fault is pushed upwards relative to the other, this movement is named thrust earthquake. It occurred at a previously unknown reverse fault. This earthquake created about 42 kilometers of surface rupture, and it had a vertical slip of up to 4.2 meters. The earthquake was found to have occurred very close to the epicenter of the 1954 earthquake, which was no surprise as they were very similar.
And with their bare hands, the rescue teams of El Asnam continue their search of the ruins of the Algerian city. The task of finding survivors goes on round the clock and against it, for it's now more than 3 days since the earthquake, and hopes must be fading that many more people will be found alive beneath the tons of concrete and twisted metal. Now and then, the painstaking search of the rubble produces its reward, in this case, the rescue of a 2-month-old baby girl. She'd spent 2 nights in the ruins of her home, but seemed unharmed, Neither of her parents appears to have survived, so she becomes one of the many orphans of the earthquake in El Asnam. No one knows how many people were buried in the city and around it, but while there remains the slightest chance of life, the search will continue. So far, 900 people have been rescued, 1,500 bodies have been recovered, and the death toll is still estimated at 20,000, but it'll be a long time before confirmation is possible. From El Asnam today, Bill Hamilton sends this report.
Food is a major concern. As the army arrive with emergency supplies, hundreds jostle for loaves of bread. All over the area, tinted villages are springing up, and there have been appeals for more aid. The International Red Cross say there's been a tremendous response so far. Meanwhile, the diggers and excavators continue to claw at the broken remains of some of the city's largest and most modern buildings. 100 people, some of them Europeans and Japanese, were at lunch when this hotel collapsed. Witnesses say like a pack of cards. Several bodies still lie below the rubble. Everywhere it seems there was panic.
In the time of the earthquake, I was in the mosque, and there were many people, about 1,000 people. And the earthquake, it was they got all in a panic, and they wanted to get out of the mosque, but there were many people, and the door was not wide enough to get all outside.
On the outskirts of the city, entire housing estates have been destroyed. 3 days after disaster struck, firemen and rescue teams are still battling to reach victims trapped in ground floor flats. Friends console one another, but there's little hope of finding any more alive. There are many thousands here who are thankful to have escaped from new apartment blocks like these. Several have now survived 2 major earthquakes in which their houses have literally collapsed around them. Now the Algerian authorities face the enormous task of finding them their 3rd home in the space of just 30 years. This is Bill Hamilton in El Asnam in Algeria.
And in El Asnam today there were new tremors. They caused no new destruction, but they did cause the rubble to shift and some panic among the survivors of Friday's earthquake. Tonight, relief officials repeated their appeal for more.
So the earthquake caused a great number of casualties, killing around 5,000 people and injuring roughly 9,000. The earthquake caused extensive damage to the El Asnam area, destroying at least 25,000 houses and resulting in $5.2 billion in damage. The damage to housing structures rendered 300,000 people homeless, and the economic development of the region was seriously affected at all levels. The rate of destruction of buildings was 71%, including 212 public buildings totally destroyed, including the main hospital, and many buildings that escaped ruin needed to be demolished because their structures were irreparable. In downtown El Asnam, in a 6-block neighborhood, at least 20% of these blocks collapsed completely, and 60% were so badly damaged that they had to be demolished. The earthquake destroyed various networks, which took months to repair. The sewage system was completely out of order after the earthquake. Electricity was unavailable, and the telephone equipment had suffered serious damage. Aside from what it caused in terms of destruction to the buildings and loss of life, the earthquake allowed the scientific community to learn many lessons. It forced them to draw attention to the strong seismicity of the region and focus on the necessity of taking earthquake-resistant measures on construction. They began to focus on other forms of construction with the structure braced by walls rather than frames. The earthquake also led to the birth of the first Algerian seismic regulation. The earthquake also led to large-scale studies beginning to identify the seismic hazard of the region. They worked on strengthening of the seismic monitoring network of the territory, and seismic risk management laws were created. Following the earthquake, they identified fault zones, evaluated which buildings were vulnerable, identified areas of landslide risk, and created intervention plans, established emergency organizations, and expanded seismic surveillance.
These are our sources. that is all.